Second. Okay, hi, we're live. Hello, everybody. This is Roy with Red Hoop Talks, and
this is Shannon with Red Hoop Talks. How y'all Indians doing out there tonight?
Tasha. That's Caddo for
okay.
hello, friends. All right. Well, we actually, this is show number 2. We got the first one in the bag. We talked about a bunch of things about what the show's going to be about, what we're going to do, what we're going to say, how we're going to do it. Talking about Indian country, issues that affect it, things that are going on that are good, things that are going on that are bad, cultural things, and we're going to try and bring some guests on, which is cool because we actually have a guest today.
Yay, we have a guest.
So we need to do some housekeeping first. So before we start our show, gosh, and the name of the tribe is hard for me to pronounce. It's Kittima, right? The Kittima tribe of Southern California.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
The Kittimas. Right?
I have no idea who you're talking about. What are you talking about? Let's do this first. The first thing that we want to do before we get started is we want to acknowledge the land on.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Right? Is that what you're trying to do?
That's exactly
and do you know
what I'm
why
this
is important, Roy? What did our elder tell us why this was important to recognize on whose land we stand?
It's who we are. Because to Aboriginal or Indigenous or Indian people, our land, the place that we are at, our place is important to us. We are the caretakers of that land that we stand on, and here it's the Chumash and I butchered the name, Kedama people.
Is it Kumeyaay?
Kumeyaay. And maybe that's how it's Kumeyaay.
So what I'm going to do.
Well, I know it's the Tongva people too out there in Long Beach.
Yeah, the Tongva, absolutely.
And, but I'm in Riverside now, so I'm not sure exactly the name of how they pronounce. I've never even run into anybody that's part of the tribe here.
So I've got something that can help you out, Roy. So I'm going to share my screen, okay?
All right, let's do that.
I'm going to share a screen.
Segue, right?
Yeah, this is I've got it up. This is a Canadian nonprofit organization called Native Land, and they have information about why it's important to acknowledge Indigenous territory, not just for us Indigenous people, but for everyone, to acknowledge and honor those that came before us and who have lived and worked the land for centuries. So let's do this. So see, we can search a location here in Riverside, California. So look at that. Bam. So here are the Luiseno, the Cahuilla, and it even talks about the treaties that relate to the land. This is a really great website. You can see it up here.
So what is it saying? It's a mix of the Tongva people,
the Tongva, Luiseno.
So I know some Luisenos, so I'm going to talk to them. So exactly what area we are, it doesn't really give like.
Oh yes, it does. So let me
dig down deeper.
Yeah. So if I can find it, it's right here. Check this out. Look at this interactive map they got going on. So you can look at the different Aboriginal territories. You see how they're all, it's not a bunch of little boxes like what we have in the United States.
They all overlap and
look at this,
like it always was.
Look at our sharing of territory and place and caretaking. And then if we turn that off and turn on this, we can see the different treaties that most of the time took away that land.
Well, zoom in. Zoom in.
All right. Southern California, you're in Southern?
Yep. Riverside County.
I don't know where it is. Where is Riverside?
Keep going down. You're good.
I'm going down further?
Yep. Straight in now. You're almost dead centered on where we're at. There you go. Right there. Head on in. Keep going.
Where?
Keep going.
I don't know where I'm going, Roy.
You're going right there. You're fine. There you go. Keep going.
Why am I going
right there? There. No, too far, too far. Back up a little bit, back up a little bit. There you go. Now slide the map down so I can see up there. No, the other way. That's the ocean.
Roy, is this helpful?
Right there, right where the purple areas are. That's
Yeah.
that's the Riverside area over in there.
Well, there you go. So those are the treaties that, and if you if you link onto these, you can go to learn more about these treaties and other related maps. So this is a really great resource here about native territories and native lands. So learn where you are, learn about where you stand, and use this great resource here about native land. So where I'm at is let's see, in Maryland, just outside of DC, and our nations here that are still here, and the states recognized Piscataway and the Conoy Piscataway nations here in Maryland. So yeah, thanks for letting me share that. If you want to.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So thanks again to the first people of California upon whose land I stand. I appreciate you allowing me to be here, and we do take care of that, and we do honor you and all the tribes that were here or are still here. I know that a lot of those tribes that we just talked about, they don't even have any tribal affiliation in this area anymore. So that was part of our housekeeping. We wanted to get out there and talk a little bit about that. Okay, now our other little piece of housekeeping. We had another set of guests that were supposed to come on today because of COVID-19, the coronavirus, and what's been going on. We talked last week about how it was affecting Indian country in a very adverse way. And we noticed that there was a big pocket, and there was a lot of news articles from Indian Country Today was talking about it, how Navajo Nation was being affected really bad by COVID. And we actually I have a family member that's out there, Frances Atakai, and she lives on the reservation, and she was going to bring another guest who was part of the Manuelito Veterans organization in Gallup, and they were going to talk to us about what was going on. Unfortunately, Mr. Smith, Schubert Smith, had to go. The tribal council had called him to a meeting today, so he couldn't make it. And then we had some technical difficulties with Frances, so we're going to work on that and try and get her on next week. But did you have any updates on the news this week on that?
Yeah, you want to go to the news there? We haven't even really introduced ourselves yet here, Roy.
Yeah, I said who it was.
Do people care? Well, let's just get into it. Yeah, we can go straight to the news if you want. At least on COVID, let's talk about that. I'm going to share my screen if I can figure out where it is. Chrome. Yeah, so we're all learning all the little technical nuances for this live streaming, which has been great. Okay, so I'm sharing a screen right now. Do you got it, Roy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to tell you all about nativenewsonline.net. You've got to use this. It's got some really great stories, really great people bringing news to you. My friend out there, Levi Rickert, good man. He's running a good shop there to bring good, truthful, and objective news out to all of us. So thank you, Levi. The Navajo Nation, COVID-19 deaths surpass 50, death toll at 52, cases rise by 78. So there's been 1,360 people infected that they can tell. And in the news published yesterday here, they've given us some notice. It's I think the third largest hotspot outside of New York and New Jersey, from what I've read in some other news articles. What about there's another article that seemed to be really good today. Let me see if I can share that. This is still a little clunky going back and forth. And I'm sharing that. And this is from US and World report where it's talking about New York and Jersey and New Jersey are the highest, and next in line is the Navajo Nation. They talk about there's a really great story here that's being told, in which the Navajo Nation president, Jonathan Nez, says, "We are United States citizens, but we're not treated like that. You can hear the frustration, the tone of my voice. We once again have been forgotten by our own government." And the Navajo Nation president goes on to talk about how they've signed treaties, giving up their land in exchange for certain promises, which included health care, which has never been good health care. It's always run behind inequity with other health care available in the United States. And so Navajo is suffering today for that and many other reasons. Part of it is cultural. We live with extended families, and we live in community. So on one hand, that's just how we are as Native people. But then on the other hand, you have the lack of housing. And so you have people that have to live with many people to one unit, and then you have a lack of health care. And the Navajo Nation, I wish I would have brought a map, Roy, of the Navajo Nation and how expansive it is and where the different areas are at Navajo. It's an incredible place, and they're suffering the most. Navajo Nation had wonderful code talkers. They've had, I'm losing my train of thought. Roy, I'm turning it over to you before I start.
I'm gonna see if I can pull that up real quick here.
But there's a lot of other things going on. Excuse me, in Indian country with COVID and the funding. So not just the excuse me, not just
that was a good one.
Not
so there's I don't know if you can really see that. I can maybe zoom into it a little bit. But that's there we go.
What'd you do? Google Maps?
That's I think that is Google Maps, but it is Navajo Nation there.
And Navajo encompasses a 3-state area: Utah,
the tri-state area of New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. So it right there, 4 corners, so all that area, and then you have Hopi land in the middle of it all. You've got the Zuni Reservation to the south. All of the tribes that are located close to the Grand Canyon region. So that's, and then you've got the trust land in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Right.
So it's just a massive area, and there are more than just the Navajo on that land. There are many tribes on that land, so they're being adversely affected. And I know that some of the tribes that are in Navajo land, but they aren't Navajo, those are being affected even more so. And it's just their numbers are through the roof, like you said, because of some of the living conditions. Because some of those places, they don't have any running water. There's very impoverished, and so this COVID thing is running through it, just going crazy.
Yeah. So we send our love and our hearts to the warriors out at the Navajo Nation and at other nations that are at the front lines fighting to keep our elders and our youth and others safe and protected with whatever methods and whatever PPE they have. So let's so Roy, why don't we take a breath and tell me a little bit about yourself, Roy?
Well, we introduced ourselves last time, but I mean, I live out here in Southern California, and my tribal affiliation is Caddo Adeas. Some other mixed Indian in there, and then on the other side of my lineage, my mom is a French Polak, so a whole bunch of good stuff in there: Indian, French, Polak, just red-blooded American, right? So
Marine.
they're from Louisiana. Oh, and a Marine too. We can talk about that later. I'm just a crayon eating, Marine. That's what they call us. But what my tribal affiliation is with Louisiana, and so I try and get out there as often as I can. Haven't been out there in years, but I'm part of the Indian community here in Southern California. We have a very diverse community here. We've got you go to the powwow arena and there's people from Alaska, there's people from California, there's people from Arizona, New Mexico, back east, of course, all through the South. We have a traditional Southern drum at our powwows. So the Southern drum is the host drum. And then, of course, we have a lot of Northern boys out there too, sitting on the drums. So a lot of diverse nations gather together here in Southern California and commingle with one another. So it's a pretty awesome culture, pretty good group of people. The activism community is very strong. Been involved with a lot of those folks for a long time, working on local issues and some national issues. So that's just a little bit about me and my background and who I'm part of. And, you and I were both adopted in the Lakota Dakota way by our elder into their way of their oral tradition. So that's another thing that we have in common is that we've been taught by our elder that said things to us in a certain way, in a good way, and we try to express that through our words and the things that we do and say. And that's what this meeting of you and I was all about. It really was what he had explained to us, what we were supposed to do in the future was to disseminate information and work within the community and make sure that the world doesn't end in our time.
Great.
Not to bring a downer on the whole situation, but we're not doing a real good job of it in light of what's going on out there.
I know.
But
no,
I think
nobody drink any Lysol, no disinfectant.
Oh my hell!
Told me about that wonderful new tidbit of information put out by our head of the government. That guy's name.
Don't forget the light bulbs up your ass too. That'll help to kill the disease.
From Trump. That came from our guests that we're going to introduce later. So I'm Shannon.
I heard if you drink Lysol and you shove a light bulb up your ass, you can get rid of the COVIDs.
Okay, so let me introduce myself now, will you? So I'm Shannon O'Loughlin. I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I've known this guy for like 30 years or something like that, and so he really is my brother, and we treat each other like such, and we do our best to offend one another all
the time,
and get on each other's nerves, and I hope you all have fun watching that sometimes. But let's see, Roy, are we ready for a little Indian one-on-one? Wait, it's not.
Damn! On the live stream, sis? Really?
Friday night, man. It's time to chat. What is it? I'm too old to remember these things. What did we do at powwows?
You're ready to 49 now is what you're doing.
I'm sorry. So it's
talking about shagging now is what you're talking about.
That's what it is. Indian 101. Indian 101. Like
shagging.
class, the beginning class in college is always a 101 class. We're going to get into Indian 101, and this is where we bring in the transition music. Ta-da-da, it's time for Indian 101. So this is when I bring out some of that basic information about Indian history, Indian law and policy, and other things that we should have been taught in school but never were. And I think for our first show, we'll get things started with some very basic Indian 101.
Is this like white people stuff that you're putting up there, or is this for everybody? Is this white folk stuff?
This is for all, because I'm amazed with how many Indians that we don't know our own history, and also we've got tribal citizens out there who don't know their own treaties, who don't know why things are the way they are, and so I'm hoping that we'll build a foundation of information about Indian country that we all can.
Well, lay it on us, sister. Let's see it.
All right, so let's get some basic information. Okay, Roy, what were the population estimates of Indigenous peoples in the United States in 1492? Do you have any idea how many Indians there were back then?
Ooh, I want to say that they were talking about in the 50-something millions.
Yeah.
Maybe more.
Yeah, maybe more, maybe 100 million. And the thing is that it's really hard to produce reliable numbers about what was here before, because disease really did a number on Indian nations. But the nations that were here before any Europeans came in 1492, they were autonomous. They possessed their own governments and governance structures. They had their own religions and cultural practices. They spoke thousands of diverse languages and dialects. They had their own cultural structures and economies and trade. And oftentimes we don't think about all of the complexities that were here on the land where we stand before 1492, because we're never taught about it. There were extensive trade routes throughout the United States and Canada and into Mexico. In fact, there's migration stories of my people, and probably yours too, that we came from Mesoamerica, and we migrated up through the Southwest and into the Southeastern United States, and even kept going up into the North. There's really complex stories that we never are able to get into in many of our public schools, because this is not how we teach history. We teach Indians are teaching about Indian history stops about 1900 in our classes in high school and middle school and grade school. That's it. That's all.
Well, not to interrupt you, but one of the things that I've noticed, growing up and growing up in white culture, and having an Indian father that was in prison all of my life, and being separated from my Indian family, and then being reintroduced back into the family later on in life, I noticed that the cultural differences of how you learn about that history in particular is very different, because when the grandmas and the grandpas and the aunties and the uncles tell the stories, the ancient stories, the old stories, the creation stories, and who we are, where we came from, and those kinds of things, even the stories about the dances, that it's all passed down, and it's just like stuff that you just grew up hearing. So those people, like my cousins, they speak those stories because it was just part of the everyday life that the elders taught those things, and it's still passed down. We still have the same stories that were passed down, and we still have our dances, but it was an oral tradition, so it was never written down, and it was never taught like the white world does, like the U.S. educational system teaches things like history,
Right. And when the Spanish came and they brought their Catholicism, They
Oh,
also
don't even get me started on that one.
they also brought these things called papal bulls, which were the laws from the Catholic Church, and they would hammer them into the trees. They'd hammer this written document into the trees, and they would say it to the indigenous people. They say, basically, if you don't convert, you're damned, and we're going to kill you.
Mhm.
Of course, there were no indigenous person that understood what the hell they were talking about, but the Spanish wreaked havoc um, uh, in uh, when they arrived, mostly in the southeast and around that area. But let's move on before I get too much into this history, because I just wanted to give little doses of basic information. So, Roy, what do you think? Do you know what the first treaty was with a tribe and a European government? Do you know that first treaty?
The first governmental treaty.
The first
Um,
treaty between a European nation and an Indian nation.
was that the one that we lost, that there was going to be no pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving?
So that's down. You're talking about the Wampanoag that are a little further south than what I'm. Let me share this with you, if you could.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sharing a website from the Onondaga Nation, and the Onondaga and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy are currently located in Canada and in New York State. The Onondaga Nation tells a story about the two-row wampum, and it's the first treaty between the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee, and the way they tell the story. And of course, I'm not going to be as good a storyteller as they are, but this two-row wampum that you're seeing on the screen here, you see that there's white wampum beads at the background, and then two rows of purple beads together. And the way they describe that is that's a treaty that expresses how the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch are together in the same river, and they're floating down the river together. And one purple line there is the Haudenosaunee canoes that go down the river, and the other purple line is the European ships. And we will travel together along the river, but you're not going to cross into my canoe, and I won't cross into your ship, but we will ride down the river together. And it's really a beautiful story about a very significant business and trading relationship, as well as a cultural relationship that was built with the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee. And that was, let's see, 16. This tells the story about in 1613, when the Mohawks noticed newcomers coming to their land. So this was early in the 1600s when this first treaty came about. I have no transition from here to where I'm going.
There you go. No, you just shut it down.
So let's jump to today and get on. We've got just a little more basics. We've got a little more news and I want to bring our guest in as quickly as possible, because
so we talked about population, what it could have been. We talked about real quick. You just said that the first treaty was in the 16 what?
1600s. I'm not certain the exact date.
With Onondagas.
With the Haudenosaunee, which are the Confederacy. So that's Onondaga, Mohawk, Oneida.
Shout out Tony, my Oneida brother.
What?
Just throw a shout out to my boy Tony.
Yes, Tony. So today, let's talk about today. Where are we today? Just with some basic information. There's 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States and Alaska. and about 300 other tribal entities that are state or locally recognized, all of which are sovereign entities, have their own laws, they have their own jurisdiction, they have their own membership or citizenship requirements, are diverse in their languages and their cultural practices. And most of them have their own websites. So if you want to know more about any particular tribe, you can find a lot of information online. Today, there's over 5 million Native Americans in the United States, or who self-identify. About 2.9 of those are 2.9 million are full blood, considered full blood, and another 2.3 million are mixed, like us. And I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about what it means to be Indian, and what it doesn't necessarily mean what you look like about being Native American, but it's about who you are and where you come from. And yeah, that's all I've got in my Indian.
That's a good segue into what we got going on. But we have a guest sitting in the back room here waiting to get on. And would you go ahead and give an introduction, because the reason she's here is to actually talk somewhat about that, and she has an organization that she wants to talk about also. And would you introduce her?
I shall. I hope you're ready, Kim. We're going to bring you on. I want to introduce everyone to my friend Kim Mettler, who's a citizen of the Hidatsa, Mandan, and Arikara Nation. You know, those 3 affiliated tribes. There she is. Hey, Kim.
Hi.
Hi, Kim. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I went to law school with Kim. She's now a recovering attorney and is the CEO of Heart River Coaching. So we're going to talk a little bit about what she's doing, but we're also going to talk a little bit about what it means to be who we are, doing what we're doing. And yeah, you were telling me, Kim, earlier today, someone asked you a funny question.
I was having a conversation with a group of people. So my other job, aside from being a coach, I also I provide training and technical assistance to child welfare organizations around complying with the Indian Child Welfare Act. And I was having a conversation with a group of people, non-Native people, and one of them said and I had introduced myself as a citizen of the 3 affiliated tribes. And one of the people said, you know what I would really like? Do you think you could introduce me to some real Indians? And and something like that. I mean, it used to like really bother me. I'd want to, go outside and scrap, but instead, I mean, I'm representative of several organizations, and so it was kind of like. So I get really curious. Well, what do you mean real Indian? And she said, well, the Indians that have the really rich culture. And I said, have you been visiting any of the tribal nations here in Southern California? And she goes, oh, well, I've been to Pechanga, but they don't count.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
And I said, and so what makes you think that Pechanga doesn't count? And she says, well, they don't have teepees. This is so going downhill. And I'm just looking at this woman, and I had to reach into my heart and find compassion. And so I said, well, so I gave her my version of Indian 101, which was, there's, over 500 federally recognized tribes and diverse culture. And you do realize that the Indians in Southern California didn't have teepees. And so it's funny that you all are having this conversation, because that's something that I've actually been thinking about recently is, what does it mean to be Native? What does it mean to identify as an Indigenous person?
All right.
Nice. Yeah, because the California Indians, we all know they had flip-flops and board shorts.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The original
That's where it came from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, and I think it's something that we all struggle with. Like, I was raised by my grandmother, who is full-blood Choctaw. I mean, this beautiful, amazing woman, but everyone around me wasn't. She married this big old Irishman, and my mom was, but she wasn't really in the picture. And I always identified as Indian, but no one ever really recognized me as Indian except my grandmother. And I don't really think I understood any of that until I went to school and at college, and actually started taking some Indian history classes and other things, and then brought it home to my grandmother to share with her about what I was learning. And together we kind of pieced together why things were the way they were, and why her life was the way it was, and why she didn't have the opportunities, why she could never get ahead, why her mother stopped speaking their language when the kids would walk in the room. And she was raised in on the red soil in southeastern Oklahoma, killing rabbits for supper, among other things. I mean, but she didn't understand why her mother was so did not want to share any of that information with her. And so my education actually helped her understand who she was as a full-blooded Native American woman. So that really made me feel empowered about who I was, and that it was okay to be who I was. And even if I didn't look like her, I still had something to contribute to her and to my people, like she wanted me to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that all of our situations are different too, because I know, like, I've got family from back home and people in Oklahoma that are from the reservation that, they're like full-blooded whites, but they live within the tribe, and they don't.
What is that?
Well, they're whites but they live on the res, and they don't have the same kind of issue because they were just indoctrinated into the culture from the beginning. They're 3/4 white and maybe only have an eighth or a quarter of native blood in them, and they don't look like they are a native person, but they come from the res, and you couldn't tell that there was any difference in in how they interacted with the tribe. But people like us, like, for instance, like you said, your grandmother had to learn some things from you. My father was in prison since I was 2 years old, so he never knew anything about his culture really, because he grew up in Texas and just ran the streets. Got away from the homeland there in Louisiana, ran the streets of Texas, and he never knew anything about his culture or anything like that. So, he never learned. So I don't know that, everybody has a different situation. I would guess. I've ran into, I don't want to call it discrimination, because what you just spoke about, like the person asking you, hey, can I talk to a real Indian? And I heard it even when Shannon and I went to go do Joe Rogan's show. We heard the same kind of, like, they look at us like, what are you guys? Who are you guys? You guys aren't. We were expecting long hair and braids and feathers. Whereas all that stuff. So, I mean, we all get a lot of that, and everybody's situation is different. And then on the other hand, if you do go, to the res, or you do go back to Minnesota, or you do go back into, Indian country, then you've got to deal with, the full bloods and the culture there, and being an outsider from there. So, if you are a half breed, you do kind of get kind of bounced around in both worlds,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so. My story is really, I can never tell my journey back to my cultural roots without talking about my dad. And he was raised by his grandmother because his mother died while giving birth to him. And his grandmother chased off my grandfather, which is my link to my tribal nation. And so, long story short, my dad grew up. They were dirt poor. He was raised by his grandmother, who had already raised, I think, 13 children by that time. She was a single mother. And so, my dad spent his whole life not knowing who his dad was and pretty much being left to his own. And he was, I relate to your story, Roy, because he was out running the streets and taking care of himself and doing the best that he could. And he was the half-breed. And that's what they called him. And he never, that I can ever remember in his lifetime, never had a sense of belonging anywhere. And I always think about how, as I was growing up, how I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I always felt like I was an outsider somehow. And it wasn't actually until I started doing this work on the Indian Child Welfare Act, and I started really getting involved in learning about historical trauma, unresolved trauma. And then that's when I really understood that the sense of not belonging really wasn't mine, but it was something that I inherited. Mm. But it was back in 1996, I woke up one day. We never talked about my grandfather, my dad's dad. We never talked about him. I just knew him by his name. And occasionally I'd ask my dad about him, and my dad would kind of shut down the conversation and say, well, he's dead to me. I've got no need for that son bitch. This kind of thing. But it was in 1996. I remember it clearly. I woke up one day, and I cannot explain it, but I just had this literal burning desire to know if my grandpa was alive. And that was back before the internet as we know it. So you had to do things like use phone books and go to the library. But I managed to find out that my grandpa was still alive, living somewhere in Montana. And I had gone, this happened probably, this kind of process took place over about 2 weeks, but eventually I ended up at the library in Seattle where I was living at the time. And they had this big room that was full of phone books from all over the country. And hand to God, I'm not exaggerating the story, but I walked into this room, which is empty. And on the table right in front of me was a phone book from northeastern Montana. I still get the hair stand up when I think about this. And I stood there looking at this phone book because I was like, nah. And I picked up the phone book and I started thumbing through, and sure enough, there was Grandpa's phone number. Oh so I wrote it down, and I went home, and without a thought, because one thing that probably still remains true about me is I lack common sense and I lack fear. So I went home and I called him. I just dialed this phone number up, and this man answered the phone, and there was no doubt in my mind that this was my grandfather. I mean, it was just like talking to my dad. And so we had a conversation, and I told him, I introduced myself, and I said, I'm doing research on my family history, and your name keeps coming up. And so I was wondering if I could ask you a couple questions. And his response to me was, I don't know your family, and I don't know nothing about no boy either. Mm. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm just like, what do I do? And so I said, well, do you know this person? And my grandmother's name. And he's like, nope, I don't know nothing about that woman, and I don't know nothing about that boy either. So I just started making up questions because I'm trying to think, this is clearly him, and what do I do? And so finally he stopped me at one point in the conversation, and he said, tell me who you are again. And I said, well, my name is Kim Mettler, and the woman that you don't know anything about is my grandmother, and the boy that you don't know anything about is my dad, so that makes me your granddaughter. And there's like this dead silence on the phone, and after a minute he finally says, well, I don't have any money. Fair enough, Grandpa. and so I told him, I said, I'm not interested in your money. I'm just curious about you. And he had me write a letter. And then a couple weeks later, I get a phone call from my aunt, which, I don't know what I really expected, but, Grandpa had gone and he married a woman from a reservation in northern Montana, had a whole family with my dad's half siblings. And here I have this whole family now. And so they invited me to go out that summer to meet them. And I did. And again, this is one of those examples where I have no fear or common sense. And so I hopped into the 91 Ford Festiva, turquoise blue with a hot pink stripe on the side. And I drove out to the middle of Montana to the reservation where I've never been to a reservation, right? I mean, I just drove out there and showed up. And it turns out they were preparing for Sundance. That year was the year that my family was sponsoring that. So we're getting ready for camp. And again, I have no idea what's going on. I'm just trying not to be disrespectful or embarrassing in any way. And they sent me to get blankets for the giveaway, to get them from my grandfather. So, but first I had to go get my cousin out of treatment.
Oh, no.
You don't even know. I drove through a tornado to do that, by the way.
Oh, no.
Then on the way back, we stopped at my grandfather's house to get the blankets, and we're banging on the door, and he finally answered the door. And here's this grizzly bear of a man. He filled the doorway. And his hair's reaching and grabbing, and he's just kind of this growly man. And he starts hollering, "What do you want?" and I'm looking at him, not because I'm intimidated, but I'm standing there because I'm like, holy crap, he is my grandfather. I mean, like, dead to rights, he was my dad. So we got the blankets, and I turned to leave, and it was like this. It was not the Oprah moment that I had believed would somehow show up, right? I just got yelled at by this grouchy old man. And I got in the car and we went to do ceremony. And, that was the year that I Sundanced, and many conversations with elders about them saying, because I was teased. I was even teased by my family. It's just like, oh, you're that white girl. You're that white girl coming to play Indian for the day, right? But the elders would say, you came here for a reason. Mm-hmm. Your ancestors were calling you back here. So push comes to shove, what we later find out after I spend the entire summer out with my relatives, and I get back home and I learned that my grandfather had just a few months to live. He was dying of cancer. Mm-hmm. And so my dad had asked me, he called me one day and he said, my sister called, and he'd grown up his whole life not having family. And all of a sudden he's got a sister that's calling him. And he said, Kim, I don't know what to do. Should I go and see him? And I just told my dad, I said, you have to ask yourself if he dies and there's something you want to ask him or something you need to say to him, and you don't get to do that, are you going to regret it? And that should be your guide. Mm-hmm. And he's like, all right, I'll call you later. And then he called me the next day as he was making his way to meet his father for the first time. And so he met his dad about, I'd say it was about a month before his dad passed away.
Wow.
And at the funeral, at, the wake, we had his, the relatives, the sibling family from Fort Belknap, and we had all of our relatives from Fort Berthold, from my nation there. And it was so interesting because I felt both accepted by my family, but I also felt like I had to prove something to them. Mm-hmm. And then when my dad showed up, what was really interesting is that the relatives acted like he had just visited them all last week. I mean, they just were like, oh, our boy is finally home. And the last thing I'll share about that is, when I talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act and the importance of keeping children that are out of home connected with their community and with their relatives, it's because that relationship is medicine. And it's not just medicine for that child, but it's also medicine for that family and that whole community, because we are trying to heal our trauma. And I always share this story about the conversation that my dad had with his dad, literally the only time that they met. And that was, it was after my dad passed away. My mom said, you know, did your dad ever tell you what they talked about? And I said, no. And she cried. She started to cry, and she said, your grandfather told your dad that he had always missed him, and that he had always loved him, and that he had always wanted him, and he spent his life waiting to be with him. And it's hard because you have these two men that spent their life apart for reasons that were not their own choices. And in the end, I hope that the two of them were able to find peace and finally being together in that way. But the thing about that story, the reason why I share that with people is because that is to say that, you know, we as relatives, we always are looking for our relatives. We're always longing for our relatives and to connect with them and to be with them.
Yeah.
And those of us, like the three of us here in this conversation who, you know, we weren't raised in our community immediately like that, that's not our fault. And by virtue of who we are related to, that makes us Native. And I feel like I don't want to, you know, I don't want to cause controversy or anything, but I feel like it's really like this colonial settler conversation that we get into with our relatives and other people in our community when they're just like, well, you might be so-and-so's daughter, but you weren't raised around here, so you're not one of us. Or, well, you don't speak the language, so you're not one of us. And I just kind of feel like, you know, if I had my choices, I would have grown up in my life with my relatives. And I'm sure if my dad had his choice, he'd have grown up with his dad. So, thank you.
Well, that's an awesome story, and it's not one that's unfamiliar to myself because a lot of it intermingles with my story also. But what you're saying about family and the importance of it for us, you know, I've noticed that in Native culture more so than in any other culture that I've, you know, been around or was raised in, for lack of a better term, white culture or, you know, gringo culture or whatever you want to call it. But when I first did go back home, it was the same situation. You know, I had come back, you know, because I'm Roy the Third. It was my father, my grandfather. Was named after both of them, but was separated from them my whole life, was taken away from them. And it was, you know, mostly their fault. But so when I did go back home and I did get to go see my aunties and my uncles and extended, you know, great uncles and the people that, you know, conducted the ceremonies and kept the families together. And we had powwow every year and all those things. Those people welcomed me in with open arms like I was missing, you know. And it was even though these people, I didn't know them, they made me feel like family. And when I went back home, I finally felt like I was home, you know. It just, that land being like when Shannon and I just opened up the show with being part of that place. There's something special when I go back to Louisiana, when I'm in Shreveport, when I'm standing on that dirt there's something special that happens to me. There's some energy that I get from that place that makes me feel so part of it. And then the family there, the people, the extended family, my uncles, my cousins, you know, and there's a lot of teasing, you know, you talked about teasing, you know, teasing is part of it also. That's part of the culture. And sometimes, and human beings are human beings, no matter how you look at it. There's some shitty people out there. And sometimes because of their own inadequacies or their own problems or their own abuses or their own things, they like to take things out on other people. and it's all fear-based because they're afraid of you because you're different. You are outside of the culture, and you may have been part of, or you may appear to them to be something that they are not, and they're afraid of it, and then they pick on you, and they try and push you out or try and not include you or those types of things. And I've been involved with people like that, but for the most part, my family and my cultural reemergence, or my bringing back into the culture as a young man, was nothing but embracing for me. I felt so good when I did finally get to meet all my extended family, because we have a lot of people in Oklahoma, and then we have a lot of people in Louisiana, and when the two meet, it's just this huge party of cousins and extended cousins, and everybody's related, and the sense of family and the sense of belonging is just, it feels so good to be a part of that now as I've gotten older,
Yeah.
So I relate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too. And I am not uncomfortable around any Native community. I love to go anywhere in Indian country. I always feel welcomed and at home and get a lot of good food to eat.
Yeah.
Where I'm most uncomfortable is telling people who aren't from Indian country who I am and what I do.
Yeah.
Because they look at me suspect. They don't believe that I could be the executive director of the Association on American Indian Affairs. They don't believe that, oh, well, what do you do? Oh, I work on law issues for Indian tribal nations. What? Well, why do you do that? How do you get into that? Well, because I'm Choctaw. That's where I come from. I'm working to help Indian country. It just doesn't click. It doesn't connect because we're so the general public seems so disconnected from the history of the place where they stand and the people that paid and suffered so that they could have it so well. And we're still here. We are still here. We don't look like your comic book or your mascot Indian, thank God. And though, my makeup could probably look like that sometimes.
Yep.
But
And we all know that the Choctaws make the best lawyers too.
I don't know about that.
Wow.
They do make the best Christians. They make some good Christians. They can sing some good Choctaw hymnals, man. But that's how we saved our language. Was through singing Christian hymns. And the Choctaw Nation is very proud of that fact that we have those hymns and the Bible written in Choctaw language, and that's how we've been able to hold on to it. So tribes have done many things to either resist assimilation and fight it, and other tribes have said, well, we've got to assimilate if we're going to be successful and provide for our people. So, we come from all over the place and we all have varied stories, but, we really share the same heart and the same feelings about who we are, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, not to change the subject but I wanted to draw attention to Kim's organization. Could you tell us a little bit deeper about your affiliation with them and how it works and
maybe
what
how
you're
you
doing?
got there too? Like what drove you?
Here, I'm going to share. I'll share. I'm going to try to share my screen here. So my heart work. I was, as Shannon said, I started out as a lawyer, and I can't talk and do this.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Do you want me to pull something up or?
It's Heart River Coaching is the website. So yeah,
is it a website or is it a Facebook page? Where are you?
I have a website.
Okay, hold on.
Page, and an Instagram. And if y'all go to the website, you can get to the other places there. So so I know Shannon from law school, and I left law school and I went because I was going to save the world, and By being a lawyer, I was going to help Native folks, Native communities. I was really all about supporting sovereignty and self-determination, and I was an attorney for a tribal nation for about 10 years. And here in Southern California, not all of the tribes are gaming tribes, but I happened to work for one that was. And I'm not here to criticize or rip on anybody, but I will say my experience was as a Native woman, as a strong Native woman with her own opinion and brain, and kind of a sense of wrong is wrong and right is right. In my experience, what I discovered was, you have a government that owns a multi-million-dollar business. And so imagine the best and worst of those things being mishmashed together in a very small community. Mm-hmm. There were so many things I loved about being a lawyer, and I loved being in the community, but it just became time to leave. And so I moved on from there. And then that's where I got into child welfare work. I worked with an organization that provided court-appointed special advocates for children living in foster care. But I kept walking around saying, how are you serving the Native children that are in foster care? And how are you teaching these volunteers about the Indian Child Welfare Act? And then this opportunity came up to actually go to work for a workforce development organization, which is called the Academy for Professional Excellence. It's part of San Diego State University. And my particular program is called Tribal Star. And we do training and technical assistance on ICWA implementation. We actually were responsible for writing the statewide curriculum for social workers. So anyone who gets hired as a social worker in the state of California, they have to have a one-day training on ICWA. And that's what we were the ones responsible for that. I'm actually really proud of. But through all of that, as much as I love being an advocate, I just really felt like there was something else I was supposed to be doing. And so I became a coach, a life coach. And I created Heart River Coaching. And the focus of my work as a coach, realistically, I can work with anybody on anything, but my focus is I'm really looking at women of color who are feeling stuck in their jobs and feeling like they're not happy, they're not fulfilled in their jobs, but they don't really know how to get somewhere else. And so I help those women reclaim their career joy and create a life that's more fulfilling. And I also am a self-care coach. As a big part of that, I work with women to connect their self-care practices to their values. And it's an interesting conversation because self-care has been co-opted. If you've read Audre Lorde, she talks about self-care being an act of science. And heartrivercoaching.com.
Yeah, I've got it up here. Hold on.
Is that it?
No, let me get it for you, Roy.
Thank you. Yes. So the thing about self-care is that it's become like this commodity, this Instagram commodity. And if you just take a hot bubble bath, you'll feel better. But for women of color, for Black women, Indigenous women, that's me. It's about something else. There's just this whole added layer about the stories we carry around with us from our mothers, our ancestral mothers and grandmothers, about who we are and who we're supposed to be in this world. And so my work around self-care with women of color is really to take a look at dismantling those stories and embracing the values that are important to us and healing on our terms. And basically doing it in defiance of patriarchy and white supremacy and colonialism.
Well, isn't that the goal of everything that we do?
Well, for me, I would like to say I hope so. Thank you for sharing my website.
Oh, absolutely, Kim. Absolutely. And I'm
We'll
always
put the link down at the bottom too. So if
Awesome. Thank you.
everybody who does watch, or one of the things we do, we like, subscribe, and share our links. So if you look down below, we'll have Kim's link to her website there in the comments section.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you, Kim, because of your sense of humor. You've got such a huge heart, and you seem to connect intimately with people very easily. But you are hilarious. And I thought for sure we were going to get ourselves on a run laughing and probably, knocking Roy right out of the.
She had to get so serious on it. So she was telling her story. So she was,
I take full credit for bringing the room down on that.
But what we'll do is, we're running out of time now, but we'll get you on again. That's for sure. And like to talk about your first Sundance experience. That's probably fun to talk about.
Oh, now that's a story. Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you. This was such a treat to come and visit with both of you, and such a pleasure to meet you, Roy. I'm happy to meet you, and Shannon. It's always such a pleasure to spend time with you. So thank you, sister.
Yeah,
right on. All right. Well, anything else you want to add, Shannon, before we close it up? We've been on for over an hour.
I know that it was pretty easy to do, and I hope folks are listening. And
we had three viewers at one point. So show number 2, first star, we had 3 viewers. That's pretty good. I don't know if it was me, you, and maybe one of the kids or something, but I don't know. Yeah. I think we had 3 at one point.
There's watching it and making fun of me right now.
Okay.
But I think that the issues of identity and what it means to be Indian is a huge issue, and the public doesn't understand it, and we often don't have compassion with one another with these issues. Tribes and their governments have difficulty understanding, because they've been that settler colonial mentality that you were talking about, Kim. They rely on blood quantum. Some tribes rely on blood quantum for their citizenship requirements. Others have more realistic citizenship requirements that rely on residency, culture, language, their connection with their community. But all tribes are diverse and different and sovereign, and they choose how they work, within their place and within their time, and this issue with identity, I think, is huge and misunderstood by a lot. So I'm glad we got to touch on it.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Cool. So
I'm ready for some more coffee.
I know. I'm going to be up all night tonight. Tonight's big crypto night for me. So us Indians, you even play around with crypto.
Oh, I know. Indians play golf. They buy crypto everywhere. They watch Netflix.
Netflix. God. But I'll tell you what, this COVID thing's got to be over soon, because my sexy is going away like you wouldn't believe. I'm losing. It's like refrigerator bad. Refrigerator bad. Oh, man. Killing me. I haven't had a haircut in like a month and a half. I'm getting like a hippie over here. Gotta get my fade on. All right, guys. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and secure it up. Shannon, anything else you want to say? We're back on again.
Yeah, one more thing. I'm gonna share one more thing, because this was brought to you by, if you would please share this, Roy.
Oh yeah. Our
this
sponsor.
Was brought by the Association on American Indian Affairs. I hope if you all would like to know more about what's going on in Indian country, you visit us on our website. We are the oldest nonprofit serving Indian country. We've been around since 1922. Every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, we work together to share healing and send prayer. This week, or today that's just passed, we met together to join healing, to send healing to our children. So I hope you come and visit our website. And if you'd like, you can hit that donate today button and help make a difference. So with that, that's all I have to say, Roy.
All right. Yeah. Because everybody out there, you do make a difference.
Everyone makes a difference.
Everyone makes a difference. And everyone is sacred. And everyone is connected. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming and listen to us. Just have a little fun here. And we'll be doing it again next week. Anyone have anything else? No more links. That's it. We're done.
That's it. But if anyone wants to give suggestions or comments or guest recommendations,
or if you have any really good hate stuff, put the hate stuff in there and make it good. Please make it good, because I like going through the good hate. I don't like the stupid hate.
Make it good.
Be intelligent. And everybody, please, please, please don't drink any Lysol this weekend. No light bulbs up your ass, because it's not going to work.
Talk about light bulbs. Crap.
The COVID's still going to get you. Okay. Just stay home, stay away from everybody. And we will catch all of you all next week on Red Hoop Talk. Thank you guys. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.